Today, we're diving into the art of the threshold. We're talking about those fundamental make or break moments in our lives, the turning points that really define who we are. Barb Rogers totally nails a feeling we've all had. She says life shouldn't be overwhelming. And it's true, right? Sometimes it just feels like too much. Sure, it can be fascinating and, yeah, definitely frustrating. But that feeling of being completely swamped, Rogers is saying, hey, maybe that's not how it's supposed to be. And then, right after that, she hits us with this kind of radical idea that we're not just tossed into the deep end unprepared. We actually show up with everything we need. Not just some of the tools, not most of them, all of them. The gear, it came with us. So, okay, that naturally leads to a couple of huge questions. First, what in the world are these tools we've supposedly all been given? And maybe the bigger question is, are we actually going to use them when it really counts? Because when you really think about it, a meaningful life is just one threshold after another. And the quality of that life, the growth, the success, it all comes down to how we decide to walk up to them. To really get this, the writer Steven Pressfield has this perfect image. He talks about that moment in every great story, the threshold crossing. It's when the hero leaves everything they know and steps into the great unknown. And the key is, there's just no going back to the person you were a minute before. For example, think about the story Fight Club. The main character's life has completely fallen apart, and he has to ask a guy he just met if he can crash at his place. It's a simple question, right? But he tries 10 times before he can actually say the words. But here's where it gets really interesting. He's not struggling because it's a complicated thing to ask, and it's not even because he's afraid the guy will say no. The entire battle is happening inside his own head. It's because the second those words come out of his mouth, he makes a new reality true. He's no longer the guy who has it all together. He's now a guy who needs help. Stepping over a threshold, even just by saying something out loud, means you have to let go of the self you were a moment ago. And this is not some new, modern idea. Lao Tzu was talking about this centuries ago. See, the real thing stopping us from moving into the next chapter of our lives is almost never the actual challenge. It's how attached we are to the person we are right now, the self we're about to leave behind. But here's the thing. We don't always get a say in when these moments show up. They usually come at us in one of two ways. Either we choose to leap, or a crisis comes along and gives us a big push. So on one side, you've got the leap. This is the growth path. Thinkers like Emerson were all about this. He said you've got to try to do something you haven't mastered yet. But on the other side, you've got the push. This is the path of crisis, where the world basically forces you to a threshold, kind of like what happened with Winston Churchill. I mean, for 12 years, Churchill was basically irrelevant politically, a total outcast. It wasn't that he wasn't capable, the world just didn't need him. And then, bam, 1940. The Dunkirk disaster happens, the world changes overnight, and suddenly he's the only one for the job. The crisis pushed him across the threshold. And Churchill's story really drives home a bigger point from the management genius Peter Drucker. A crisis isn't some weird interruption of your normal life. No, it's a predictable, inevitable part of it. So the question is never if the storm is coming. It's, are you going to be ready for it? Now, I know what you might be thinking. All of this sounds, well, hard, maybe even painful. And you're not wrong. But what if the pain isn't the problem? What if the pain is just the price of admission, the tuition you have to pay for real growth? Mary Tyler Moore just puts this so perfectly. We live in this culture that treats any kind of discomfort like it's a malfunction, something to be avoided at all costs. But she's arguing the exact opposite. Pain isn't a bug in the system, it's the very ingredient that forges courage. Think of it like this. Crossing a threshold is basically resistance training for your soul, right? Your muscles don't get stronger by lifting something easy. They grow when they're straining against something heavy. Well, that difficulty, that friction, that's the whole point. That is the very mechanism of your transformation. So this brings us right back to where we started. If we really do have all the tools we need, then what are they? Let's break down 3 really powerful, practical ones you can use to get across any threshold. Okay, first up, practice restraint. As Robert Greene talks about, true power comes from saying less, not more. It shows you're in control. Second, plant seeds daily. There's this great old saying that the world doesn't respond to what you need, it responds to what you do consistently. And third, make the days count. You've got to focus on the daily grind, on those small choices that slowly build you into someone who can make that big leap. And that third tool is just captured so perfectly by Muhammad Ali. It's such a powerful pushback against just waiting, you know? Waiting for things to happen, measuring your life by a calendar instead of by the character you're building day in and day out. And all of this leads us to maybe the most important shift in perspective of all. We tend to think of these thresholds as annoying obstacles we have to get past so we can get on with our lives. But that's not it. That's not it at all. Just like the Buddha said, the journey is the destination. I mean, think about it. If we finally got to some perfect happy place where there were no more challenges, it would be boring. It would be a kind of death. The meaning isn't in arriving. It's in the struggle. It's in the crossing. So that big, intimidating thing you're facing right now, that career change, that tough conversation, that creative risk you're scared to take, you might feel like it's this huge boulder blocking your path. But the threshold is the path. The act of facing it, of grappling with it, of crossing it, that is the experience of living. The 10 attempts to ask for help, the years in the wilderness, the daily practice, that's not the stuff you do before life begins. That is your life. Which leaves us with one final question, just for you. Knowing what you know now, that you already have the tools, that the pain is the tuition, and that the crossing is the whole point, what threshold are you standing in front of right now?